This generation, which has suffered fully as much, if not more heartache than people in preceding eras, needs to relearn that which the wisest men of all time have known, namely, that there is no healing of the pain suffered by humanity, except through the benign ministrations of faith. One of the greatest souls of the ages was Brother Lawrence, who said, if in this life we would know the serene peace of paradise, we must school ourselves in familiar, humble, and loving converse with God. It is not advisable to attempt to carry the burden of sorrow and mental pain without divine help, for its weight is more than the personality can bear. The simplest and most effective of all prescriptions for heartache then is to practice the presence of God. This will soothe the ache in your heart and ultimately heal the wound. Men and women who have experienced great tragedy tell us that this prescription is effective. Another profoundly curative element in the prescription for heartache is to gain a sound and satisfying philosophy of life and death and deathlessness. For my part, when I gained the unshakable belief that there is no death, that all life is indivisible, that the here and hereafter are one, that time and eternity are inseparable, that this is one unobstructed universe, then I found the most satisfying and convincing philosophy of my entire life. These convictions are based upon sound foundations, the Bible for one. I believe that the Bible gives us a very subtle, and as will be proved ultimately, a scientific series of insights into the great question, what happens when a man leaves this world? Also the Bible very wisely tells us that we know these truths by faith. Henry Bergson, the philosopher, says that the surest way into truth is by perception, by intuition, by reasoning to a certain point, then by taking a mortal leap, and by intuition attaining the truth. You come to some glorious moment where you simply know. That is the way it happened to me. I am absolutely, wholeheartedly, and thoroughly convinced of the truth of which I write, and have no doubt of it, even to an infinitesimal degree. I arrived at this positive faith gradually, yet there came one moment when I knew. This philosophy will not ward off the sorrow which comes when a loved one dies and physical, earthly separation ensues, but it will lift and dissipate grief. It will fill your mind with a deep understanding of the meaning of this inevitable circumstance, and it will give you a deep assurance that you have not lost your loved one. Live on this faith and you will be at peace, and the ache will leave your heart. Take into your mind and heart one of the most marvelous texts in the Holy Bible. I have not seen, nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart of man, the things which God hath prepared for them that love him. 1 Company 2:9. This means that you have never seen, no matter what you have seen, however wonderful it is, you have never seen anything to compare with the marvelous things that God has prepared for those who love him, and who put their trust in him. Moreover, it says that you have never heard anything to compare with the astonishing marvels that God has laid up for those who follow his teachings and live according to his Spirit. Not only have you never seen or ever heard, but you have never even dimly imagined what he is going to do to or you. This sentence goes all out in promising comfort and immortality and reunion, and every good thing to those who center their lives in God. After many years of reading the Bible, and being intimately connected with all the phases of the lives of hundreds of people, I wish to state unequivocally that I have found this biblical promise to be absolutely true. It applies even to this world. People who really practice living on a Christ-like basis have the most incredible things happen to them. This passage also relates to the state of existence of those now living on the other side and our relationship, while we live, to those who have preceded us across that barrier which we call death. I use the word barrier somewhat apologetically. We have always thought of death as a barrier with a concept of a separatist nature. Scientists working today in the field of parapsychology and extrasensory perception and experimenting in precognition, telepathy, clairvoyance, all of which were formerly considered paraphernalia of the cranks, but which are now of sound, scientific usage in the laboratories, are expressing themselves as believing that the soul survives the barrier of time and space. In effect, we are on the edge of one of the greatest scientific discoveries in history, which will substantiate, on a laboratory exploratory basis, the existence of the soul and its deathlessness. For many years I have been accumulating a series of incidents, the validity of which I accept, and which bear out the conviction that we live in a dynamic universe where life, not death, is the basic principle. I have confidence in the people who have described the following experiences, and am convinced that they indicate a world impinged upon, or entwined with our own through the meshes of which human spirits, on both sides of death, live in unbroken fellowship. The conditions of life on the other side, as we know them in mortality, are modified. Undoubtedly those who have crossed to the other side dwell in a higher medium than we do, and their understanding is amplified beyond ours, yet all the facts point to the continued existence of our loved ones and the further fact that they are not far away, and still another fact implied, but no less real, that we shall be reunited with them. Meanwhile, we continue in fellowship with those who dwell in the spirit world. William James, one of America's greatest scholars, after a lifetime of study said he was satisfied that the human brain is only a medium for the soul's existence, and that the mind as now constituted will be exchanged at last for a brain that will allow the owner to reach out into untapped areas of understanding. As our spiritual being is amplified here on earth, and as we grow in age and experience, we become more conscious of this vast world all around us, and when we die it is only to enter into an enlarged capacity. Euripides, one of the greatest thinkers of antiquity, was convinced that the next life would be one of infinitely greater magnitude. Socrates shared the same concept. One of the most comforting statements ever made was his remark, "No evil can befall a good man in this life, or in the next." Natalie Colmus, scientific expert in Technicolor, tells about the death of her sister. The following account given by the scientifically trained woman appeared in the inspirational magazine Visiposts. Natalie Colmus quotes her dying sister as saying, quote, "Natalie, promise me that you won't let them give me any drugs. I realize that they are trying to help relieve my pain, but I want to be fully aware of every sensation. I am convinced that death will be a beautiful experience." Quote, "I promised." Alone, later, I wept, thinking of her courage. Then as I tossed in bed on through the night, I realized that what I thought to be a calamity my sister intended to be a triumph. 10 days later the final hour drew near. I had been at her bedside for hours. We had talked about many things, and always I marveled at her quiet, sincere confidence in eternal life. Not once did the physical tortures overcome her spiritual strength. This was something that the doctors simply hadn't taken into account. Quote, "Dear kind God, keep my mind clear, and give me peace," quote, she had murmured over and over again during those last days. We had talked so long that I noticed she was drifting off to sleep. I left her quietly with the nurse, and retired to get some rest. A few minutes later I heard my sister's voice calling for me. Quickly I returned to her room. She was dying. Sat on her bed, and took her hand. It was on fire. Then she seemed to rise up in bed almost to a sitting position. Quote, "Natalie," she said, "there are so many of them. There's Fred. And Ruth. What is she doing here? Oh, I know." An electric shock went through me. She had said Ruth. Ruth was her cousin who had died suddenly the week before. But Helena had not been told of Ruth's sudden death. She laughed. A chill shot up and down my spine. I felt on the verge of some powerful, almost frightening knowledge. She had murmured Ruth's name. Her voice was surprisingly clear. It is so confusing. So many of them. Suddenly her arms stretched out as happily as when she had welcomed me. "I am going up," she said. Then she dropped her arms around my neck and relaxed in my arms. The will of her spirit had turned final agony into rapture. As I laid her head back on the pillow, there was a warm, peaceful smile on her face. Her golden brown hair lay carelessly on the pillow. I took a white flower from the vase, and placed it in her hair. With her petite, trim figure, her wavy hair, the white flower, and the soft smile, she looked once more and permanently just like a schoolgirl. The mention of her cousin Ruth by the dying girl and the evident fact that she saw her clearly is a phenomenon that recurs again and again in the incidents which have come to my attention. So repetitive is this phenomenon, and so similar are the characteristics of this experience as described by many, that it amounts to a substantial evidence that the people whose names are called, whose faces are seen, are actually present. Where are they? What is their condition? What sort of body have they? These are questions that are difficult. The idea of a different dimension is probably the most tenable, or it may be more accurate to believe that they live in a different frequency cycle. It is impossible to see through the blades of an electric fan when it is in a stationary position. At high speed, however, the blades appear to be transparent. In the higher frequency or the state in which our loved ones dwell, the impenetrable qualities of the universe may open to the gaze of one passing into the mysteries. In deep moments of our own lives it is entirely possible that we enter to a degree at least into that higher frequency. In one of the most beautiful lines in English literature, Robert Ingersoll suggests this great truth: in the night of death, hope sees a star and listening love can hear the rustle of a wing. A famous neurologist tells of a man who was at death's door. The dying man looked up at the physician's sitting beside his bed, and began to call off names which the physician wrote down. The doctor was personally unfamiliar with any name mentioned. Later the physician asked the man's daughter, "Who are these people? Your father spoke of them, as if he saw them." "They are all relatives," she said, "who have been dead a long time." The physician said he believes his patient did see them. "Friends of mine, Mr. and Mrs. William Sage, lived in New Jersey, and I was often in their home. Mr. Sage, whom his wife called Will, died first. A few years later, When Mrs. Sage was on her deathbed, the most surprised look passed across her face, and it lighted up in a wonderful smile as she said, "Why, it is Will." That she saw him those about her bed had no doubt whatsoever. Arthur Godfrey, a famous radio personality, tells of being asleep in his bunk on a destroyer in World War I. Suddenly his father stood beside him. He put out his hand, smiled, and said, "So long, son," and Godfrey answered, "So long, Dad." Later he was awakened, and given a cablegram telling him of the death of his father.